Hi, my name is Anna with Growing Chefs Ontario, and today we're making chicken stir fry. Stir fry is wonderful because it's a great way to use up all the different vegetables that you have in the fridge and any bits of odds and ends you have lying around, and it's so fast. Before we get started, make sure that you've watched the hand washing and knife skills video, and then we're ready to go. So let's wash our hands and meet back here. So to start this recipe, we are going to prep all of our vegetables before we even cut the meat, because I only want to use one cutting board and I'm concerned about cross-contamination. So cross-contamination is when you can make yourself very sick by, say, cutting raw meat on something with raw vegetables and then eating those vegetables without cooking them. And the raw meat can cause you to become sick. So we want to be very careful when we're working to make sure that there's no cross-contamination happening. I'm going to start by cutting my onion. So I'm going to take the top off of my onion and a little bit of the bottom, but not enough that it comes apart. I'm going to split it down the middle, and then I'm going to peel off this papery skin. Now, using my claw, I'm going to make sure that I have a firm grip on my onion, and I'm going to follow the lines that go across it. And I'm not going to cut all the way through. When we're making stir fry, one of the most important things is that all of your vegetables are cut the same size. Because this is a very quick cooking method, we want everything to cook at the same rate. For my pepper, I'm going to hold it upright and take my chef's knife and cut kind of on a bit of a curve just around it to make sure that I leave out the pith on the inside. The pith is what is kind of bitter. With my pepper, I'm going to cut it, you can either cut it into thin strips or into cubes as well. I like having thin strips of pepper because it kind of softens in a way that's similar to a noodle. And I love noodles. Other vegetables that work really well in stir fry are carrots, mushrooms, green beans, some fun greens like bok choy. For my broccoli, I have some nice little florets here. And I'm going to start by cutting off the top. And it's hard to get all the florets the same size, but do your best. You can kind of break them apart. So I have the stem of the broccoli here, and this is actually edible, and it's really good. The only thing is that you have to cut off the tough outer layer. So I'm just going to do that by cutting around. And then now that I have the skin cut off of this, I'm going to cut it into thin rectangles. I have some snow peas here. You could also use snap peas. We can cut them in just chunks, or we can cut them on a bias, which is what I'm going to do today because it's a fun shape and it cooks very quickly. So to do that, I'm gonna hold my knife at an angle, make sure I've got my claw ready to go. And I'm just gonna cut very thin slices. So it can take a little bit of practice to get the angle right for your bias, but that's okay. This also works really well for cutting green onions or other leafy greens too. I'm gonna cut up my limes for garnish now as well. Limes are wonderful because not only do they add some acidity if my stir fry is too sweet, they can also help cool down a dish if it's too spicy. We don't have any spice in this recipe, but if you want, you could definitely add some chili flakes or very thinly sliced chili too. So stir fries are all about balancing flavor. So that's your sweet, salty, spicy, and acidic. So in this recipe, I have 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, that's my salt. I have 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, which isn't, it's binder, it'll thicken our sauce. I have 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, and I have 2 cups of broth, which will just help make our stir fry saucy. So this is a salty, sweet stir fry. The other things in here that we call aromatics are our garlic and ginger. If you can't find ginger or you've never worked with it before, you can also use about 1/4 teaspoon of dried ginger, but fresh is best if you can get it. So in order to use our ginger, my favorite way to use it is to peel off the skin. You can use a spoon for this. So hold it like so and drag it down the side of your ginger. You can also use a peeler for sure, but this method just takes off the outer skin and none of the flesh. Now you can cut up your ginger very fine, or what I like to use is called a rasp or a microplane, and this will just really grind it up really fine and make it easier to incorporate with the rest of my vegetables. If you have a fine grater, that would work too. So I'm looking for about 1/2 teaspoon. If you really like ginger, you can definitely add more. And I'm going to do the same with my garlic clove. All right, so the other things that are going to go in my sauce is my sugar, my soy sauce, and my cornstarch. So we're going to give that all a good stir. And then I'm going to add my stock as well. I want to make sure that I stir up all of these smaller ingredients first so that they'll mix more easily in more liquid and not get clumpy. All right, sauce is done. Okay, so now that all my vegetables are cut, it's time to cut my protein. I'm using chicken today. You could use beef, ground pork, or if you avoid meat, you can definitely use tofu as well. And so for the tofu, you're just gonna cut it into cubes. So with my chicken, I'm gonna put it on my board. I'm gonna cut it into thin strips against the grain. We want our chicken to be about this, each piece to be about the same size, just like our vegetables. All right, so now that my chicken is cut, the very next thing I'm going to do is wash my hands and wash my cutting board. Okay, so I'm ready to start cooking. Before I start cooking, I want to make sure that everything is done and ready to go because this is such a quick cooking process. I also want to think about the density of my vegetables because that's the order I'm going to cook them in. So I have 3 of the 4 vegetables I'm working with today. All take a pretty long time to cook. So my onions, my peppers, and my broccoli. My most dense thing here is going to be my onions. They're going to take the longest to cook. And then my peppers, and then I'll probably finish off with my broccoli, and I'll use the sauce and the liquid in the sauce to steam it a little bit. But before I do any of that, I'm gonna cook my chicken. So cooking my chicken first because it takes the longest to cook, and it'll help flavor the pan for my vegetables going forward too. If you're using tofu, you also wanna make sure that you cook it first so you brown it properly, or else it'll taste like cardboard. So my heat is on. I'm gonna add about a tablespoon of oil. And when you notice your oil start to shimmer a little bit across the top, then you know it's hot enough and it's ready. So spread out your meat as much as possible so that you brown it and you don't steam it. I'm going to add some salt. And I'm not going to touch it. I want it to brown. So the more I move it around, the less it's going to brown, and I'm not going to get that same umami flavor from the browning. So I'm just waiting for these to turn white and a little bit brown because I don't want to overcook them. And they're going to be we're going to take the chicken out and then we're going to put it back in. And by doing that, I don't want to overcook my chicken in the process. So I'm just browning it. So I have a clean plate here that I'm going to put my chicken onto. Do not use the same plate that you had your raw chicken on. All right, and in go the onions. So I'm cooking on fairly high heat here, and I'm making sure that I'm constantly stirring. Because that is what's going to stop everything from burning. If your frying pan has a metal handle, metal conducts heat, make sure you use a dry cloth to hold it. A wet cloth will conduct heat very quickly. I'm going to put a little salt on my onions. All right, so my onions have been cooking for a couple minutes. I'm going to throw in my peppers. And when my peppers start to soften, that's when I'm going to add my broccoli because it's also a fairly dense vegetable. So vegetables that taste really good on the barbecue would taste really good in a stir fry because it's cooked at really high heat, and so you get that really nice charring, which adds some good flavor. And what's happening is that the sugars in the vegetables are actually caramelizing. So you get a little bit of sweetness with that char. If your vegetables are sticking on the bottom and you're seeing some smoke, that's okay because we're going to add the liquid soon, and that's going to bring up all of the really good stuff on the bottom of the pan. If things really start to burn though, make sure you turn down your heat. So I know my broccoli is cooking because it's turned this really bright green. And what's happening is the chlorophyll in the broccoli is actually going right out to the outside of the vegetable. And that's why it looks a lot brighter than when we first started cooking it. All right, so I'm getting to the point where I want to add my sauce. My vegetables are starting to soften, and I really want the steam that the sauce is going to produce to finish cooking my broccoli. So it looks very loose and right now like soupy, but that's okay because we put quite a bit of cornstarch in, and that is what's going to thicken our sauce. You don't have to use cornstarch. You could use less broth and just simmer it down until it thickens, or you could use something like arrowroot too. So I'm just scraping the bottom of the pan just to bring up any of the vegetables that got stuck. I'm going to let this simmer for about 2 to 3 minutes before I add my chicken back in. So if your broccoli isn't quite cooked, make sure you press it into the liquid. If things are really far away, you can also put a lid on, and that will help trap in the moisture so it won't thicken too quickly while not cooking your vegetables. So while I'm waiting for this to bubble away, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the rice that I cooked. So you can serve this with rice or noodles. If you're serving it with rice, make sure that you start cooking it before you start your stir fry because it takes about 15 to 20 minutes to cook rice, which will be about the same amount of time it takes you to cook this stir fry. If you're using noodles, you can cook them ahead of time, rinse them in cold water, and then just flash them with hot water before you serve as well. If your sauce gets too reduced while you're doing this, you can always add more water. And I'm about 2 minutes away, so I'm going to add my chicken back in to finish cooking with any of the juices that I've accumulated because that's just more flavor. I'm also going to throw in my snap peas too. Okay, so this is very close to the end, so you want to check for final saltiness, spiciness, all the different flavor profiles we talked about. It's going to need a little bit of salt. All right, and that's finished. So I'm just going to turn the heat off, set it to the side for a quick second, and talk about plating. So with my rice, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can do it in a bowl, or you can, if you're feeling fancy, you can take a measuring cup and just gently pack your rice into the measuring cup or a small bowl. And then I'm going to turn it over onto my plate. And then I can serve my stir fry on the side. And top with some sesame seeds or cashews. Wedge of lime. The other way that we can do it in a bowl is we can scoop in our rice. This is also the best method for noodles as well. Oops. And there you have it, 2 excellent ways to serve your stir fry.